I actually started working, and I started this course on my Wednesday night Sinai Scholars with the students. So these are students who've taken Sinai Scholars, and a lot of them are really, really enjoying it. And many of them said this is like so timely and so relevant for like 2020. And that's why when I looked at all the offerings and all the different curriculums and classes and stuff that we could study together, I felt like, you know what, positivity bias, like we could all use a little more positive in our life. Even if we are like glass half full people, positivity is definitely in demand. And even if we have an incredible skill set of how to navigate life with a positive lens or positive mindset, just bringing to the forefront or to the, you know, the consciousness, so that we can like utilize those tools in a real way. I think we can all benefit from. I'm sure everyone will agree. And the other thing is, I will say that for me, I've been enjoying this course because I feel like it's really a trip backwards, and I'll explain what I mean. It's a trip back into the building blocks of what makes Chabad Lubavitch, and what makes Chabad rabbis and rebbitzins around the world, how they function, or what makes them tick the way they do. So unlike the other courses, which were very much, you know, text-based or analysis or Kabbalah, this is stories, and stories that are real life examples of how we can reframe and reshape our mindset. With it, I also have some beautiful like links, and I think it will be easier on Zoom as we're all a little bit like, I heard the term zoomed, or we're zoomed out. We'll have a chance to like break up some of the talking. It's more for bringing style, so jump in, share your thoughts, share your feelings, share your opinions. Always challenge, because you know me, I love a good challenge. And then without further ado, let's just take a deep breath. And anyone want to tell me what's the first thought that you have when you hear the word bias? Like, what's your first word association? Everyone, you know, like you hear a word and right away something comes up in your mind. So what's your first word?
Well, it's usually kind of negative.
Yeah, negative, right? Exactly. Meaning what? Give me an example of what you mean.
You know, if you have a bias against people of a different faith or race or color or heritage, or people have bias against someone who came from any kind of different background. I heard a really inspiring speaker who talked about, I forget, she went to Yale or something like that, and somebody came to her and wanted her to be a speaker, and she was about to say no, and then someone else said, you know, that person is same alma mater as you, and she's like, oh, okay, well then, you know, I won't have a bias because it's some other lesser university, it's my university, I'll have that bias instead. And she owned it. But I think bias is kind of, it means you're not really impartial. It means that you are kind of swayed in one direction and maybe need to overcome it.
Interesting you said that. Would you say it's good or bad? I know I'm pushing you, Allison, but you're speaking up, so feel free.
Well, I think, like, you know, it's so timely, the issue of bias, because everything in the news for many months and before that about, you know, overcoming racial bias and unconscious bias. And I think the idea is that you can overcome your bias. Although I think that what the point of this course and the point of the title is to have a mindset that shifts in a direction that's positive, and you don't let the negatives overcome that bias. So it's kind of an ironic title.
Yeah, it is an ironic title. And we're going to break down the title, we're obviously going to break it down, right? Because the title's like, oh, what is this about? This is interesting. Positive bias. Like, how is bias positive? Anyone else want to share anything on bias before we like jump right in? Like, Nomi, what's like the word that pops into your head when you hear that word?
She's on mute.
Yeah, she'll unmute. She'll get it. Takes a few minutes with the technology always. It's like a little bit of a lag. And my natural instinct is like jump in and fill in that gap. And it's like, feel free to unmute yourself if you can or like to, Noe.
Sorry, I had troubles with my computer. So what was the question again, please?
Oh no, my question was like, do you think a bias is good or bad, or what's the first thought of when you hear the word bias? Like good, bad?
Well, yeah, it depends, and most of the time it could be bad, as you
Most
said.
of the time the connotation's bad.
Yes.
Fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. Sarah, anything that you would like to contribute here with this? Because I know you have certainly perspective on many different
Yeah, actually, what's interesting to me is that I recently learned that according to the neuroscientists, our brains are wired for negative bias.
Oh, yes, you're going there. Yeah.
We are wired to notice what's wrong. That we're wired for anxiety. We're wired to, just to notice that something's not right. And I'm still processing that because it means that all of us have to constantly be fighting it because our natural, we're designed to be in a negative bias.
Okay. Fascinating that you should say that. So the Rebbe, the reason I said this is a trip backwards, and we'll touch on exactly what you're saying neurologically, because there's a lot of research out there about specifically this positivity bias. Well, then that's where this whole concept of positivity bias becomes so fascinating. Like, what is that, right? So, and where does that come in, and how do we navigate it? And like you said, it almost seems like we're doomed for failure neurologically. So like, what's going on? So we're definitely going to get to that. It really is interesting. It really is fascinating. So there was once this man who was a journalist for 29 years, ran this Jewish newspaper, and it was called the National Jewish Post for 29 years. And he was meeting with the Rebbe, and he said to the Rebbe that, our publication is independent and completely objective. And so the Rebbe paused and smiled and said, independent perhaps, but objective? No such thing. Every human being is no such thing for a human being to be completely objective, because in essence, we all are created with a bias of some kind. Now, interestingly enough, the association that many of us have when we hear the word bias, especially with the current climate and with the news cycle that loves negativity, and Sarah, you're throwing in this whole okay, there's we're wired for negative bias. What is it true? How do we navigate it? What do we do about that? Are we just an uphill battle all day, every day in life? It certainly looks that way, right? And it certainly can feel that way. And how do we counteract that in a practical way? What tools can we gain to override maybe some of that hardwiring or that societal layer? Okay, if you'd like to go with that. So let's discuss this for a second. We're all here, every single one of us as parents, right? We're biased towards our children, right? If something's going to happen, we're hardwired to protect, love, nurture, care for our children. Now, that doesn't mean your child's always right. All of us, if you have a child, all of us think, in this group do. We know when our children are wrong, but God actually hardwired us with some sort of bias towards our children. Is that good or bad? Right? Any thoughts?
It reminds me of one of my favorite sayings: grandchildren are God's reward for not having murdered your teenagers.
Oh boy. My mother used to say, that's your reward. Yeah. Returns on your investment for not, yes, she'd say killing your children, but yes, murdering your teenagers, either one, any dark one, works. But I've heard that line before, right? It's returns on your investment, or remember, this is payback for all the white hair. But we do, with all that, we still have bias towards our children. We'll still, if they get into a fight with someone, we're going to want to hear their perspective. We maybe want to be overprotective towards them. Even if we are as objective as we could be, it's still meant to be that way. Can we be completely objective when our children are involved? Not really, right? It's a part of us. The child's a part of us. We may feel that way. So now we can understand this. Is this good or bad? right? You hear a story, something happens, your mom and her friend, you're going to feel, if you're, thank God you have a parent and they're healthy in their life, you're going to feel like more compassionate. So every human being has biases. What are some of the factors, and we can't really escape it, it's part of life. What are some of the factors that kind of set our bias in motion or set our mindset and what our bias is? Anyone want to give some thought factors or what causes our particular bias? Anyone want to guess any factors of things that affect us?
Well, but it's the culture, our families, friends,
For sure.
our environment. I mean, they help, well, not helping, but they contribute.
Yes.
That.
For sure, a huge factors are our family, the way we were raised, right? So the nurture. If we are always taught a certain thing a certain way, we're going to see it a certain perspective, even if we know maybe it's wrong or unhealthy. Some of us have patterns that we repeat, right? The way we approach a certain situation based on our experiences, right? Having grown up in a pretty volatile racial environment in Crown Heights through the riots and through my own personal experience of being held up, I had to override those biases as I progressed through life. And thank God I had parents who taught us to always respect every human being and always look at everyone equally, right? Because otherwise I would have been stuck in that place of a very negative, vicious cycle when it came to racial biases. I thank God that my parents raised us to see beyond experiences. But if my parents fed into those biases, then I would be seeing the world differently. So for sure, family. And I think what's interesting, Nomi, you said something, is you also said our friends. So I think society, who we hang out with, what are the kind of, and that's why we have to always kind of check in with ourselves, like, do these relationships bring the best in me? Do they not? That's also absolutely a factor in how we're going to see things. So we have our nurture, our family, or even our family will come with values, or maybe sometimes a lack of values, or whatever it is, right? Or mindset or perspective, like how you view a certain thing. How do you view tzedakah? Or how do you view the land of Israel? Or how, you were raised with certain perspectives on it, right? And that's also ultimately the importance of education, is sometimes if we have negative biases or unhealthy ones, to override them and look, how can we get beyond what maybe my experience was, or my home, what I was fed, or the society or the culture or community that I was raised in, because that's also can feed into sometimes those negative biases. Any other factors?
Well, there are.
Yeah.
So you used the word nurture, and I was thinking nature in terms of your DNA and your genetics. And I certainly don't mean that in terms of biases against, races or ethnicities. I don't mean that at all. I mean your positive and negative biases. If you're genetically more programmed to be even more negative, as Sarah was saying, then even the average person is wired to be negative. Sometimes those things I do think they get passed on through the DNA. I suspect. I'm not a scientist.
I think you are onto something tremendous. I always laugh. I always said that with my, I always thought with my older 3 children, that, there was, we read to this one more. This one was a middle child. This one was, we didn't have enough time. I had all sorts of theories at analyzing their behavior as to like what the contributing factors were. And then I had triplets, and it like took all my theories upside the head. And fascinatingly enough, when it came to like re-examining things, I really got to see that genetic DNA, that imprint that the child comes into the world with. And those of you who've spoken to me or have learned with me together, learned together with me in the past, that I've described this, that I came to this place where I would say no to all 3, right? Every nurture and environmental factor was the same. The marriage was in the same place. So we were young parents, we were old parents, we were middle-aged, we were worn out. No, the parents were the same. The marriage was the same. The home environment was the same. The older siblings were the same. The family placement was the same. And I will never forget the saying no to each one. And one would get angry and deflect and like outward. one would deeply internalize as if you just told that child that they were like worth nothing. And the third one would be like, huh, okay, whatever, and keep moving. And it was such a humbling experience because Kabbalah teaches that every soul that comes into the world, parents are really just partners with God in bringing the neshama into the world. And that the neshama, the soul, the person, the human, has their own imprint, their own mission, their own independent job in this world, right? Despite or to spite or in spite of us. That it's not to spite us, but meaning regardless of our own personal perspective on our children's journey, their neshama has its own journey, and that we're just partners with Hashem in that, right? And because we're partners with Hashem in creation, because we all know a husband and wife could do anything, and sometimes it's a child that comes out, and sometimes nothing, right? And so, or sometimes three. So we all understand that a child, we can understand it theoretically, even if we can understand it spiritually and theoretically, it's still sometimes a tough pill to swallow. Or we can look at a child's behavior and say, what did I do wrong? Or we can look at a child and say, that's my nachas, that's all my doing. When really, you know, as a wise woman told me, she said, I don't take all the credit, but I take all the blame. I was like, what? She says, yeah, no, I take the responsibility for the mistakes, but I don't take all the credit because they each come in with a godly soul. It was a good, interesting perspective. So I remember looking at the way they would process things and literally like 3 completely different reactions. And so it was so humbling to see, wow, these neshamas have a journey. They have their own genetic hardwiring. And I would gesture, I would assume that it has to do with their neshama's journey. So you're absolutely right. And I'm sure if you have more than one child, you could say one child could see something in a very positive way. One child could see it in a negative way. And there's nature, there's nurture, there's environment. And those things actually really form our operating system of how we're going to operate, how we navigate life, how we're going to see perspectives. And it could be based on our experiences, right? As I mentioned earlier, had I not been raised by parents who taught me the value of seeing beyond skin color or behavior, I maybe would see the world differently, right? And I would be locked into my negative experiences that I had growing up in a very volatile racial environment. And so, but there's no doubt that so far we've talked about nature, we've talked about nurture, we talked about genetic hardwiring, and then soul's mission in this world. All of those contribute to who we are and how we think. And that creates our biases or our perspectives, our opinions on things. And that's really our operating system. That creates our operating system. So when we react to certain things, now obviously there's an emotional level, there's a psychological level, there's traumas or experiences, and as Sarah touched upon, which we'll unpack a little bit shortly, of how our brains neurologically are hardwired for positive experiences and negative experiences. So what do we actually do with that? Now, why did I say that this class, and Leora, I noticed you joined us. Welcome. I can't see your beautiful face, but we know you're here. Those of you who know Leora, now we're really across the country. We have North Texas, South Texas, New Jersey, and California, and we're all together. And there's nothing more beautiful than that, right?
Sorry, I was a little late.
No, never apologize. Never apologize. We're always happy to have you. The motto at Chabad, come when you want, leave when you need to. It also applies up to.
Good.
So we're so far discussing biases and what causes, like what's the first thought that comes to your mind when you hear the word bias, and what's your association with that word? Is it negative? Is it positive? We have them, and here's where I'm going to kind of shift a little bit, is that and Leora, let me hear your thoughts actually for a minute on what do you think of when you hear the word bias?
That you're siding one way or another.
Is it positive? Is it negative? Is it,
it could be both.
Okay.
I mean, I think it could go either way.
It can go either way. And I think anyone think differently about that it can go either way? Does everyone agree that there is an inherent neutral layer to, this concept of a bias? And it's what we do with it that will kind of define how it plays out in our lives. Agree or disagree? Thoughts?
Agree.
I think even though like a particular thing that you're biased towards could be a really good thing, kind of the concept of a bias, generally speaking, just strikes me as more negative, like more like hindering your ability to see something objectively.
Interesting. Interesting. You're saying even if your bias is a positive one,
right,
it
like
still is going to block you from seeing objectivity.
Yeah, I'm biased towards my children. My children are good. I'm biased towards racial justice. I'm biased towards world peace or any wonderful thing. I don't know, maybe peace is not the best example, but the whole idea that I have this leaning
or lens
kind of suggests that I need to work to be a little bit more neutral, to see another perspective.
Interesting.
Even like I am definitely more hardwired to see things from a negative perspective, and my husband is definitely more hardwired to see things from a positive perspective.
Always happens, by the way. God thinks it's cute to put them together, right?
And I will sometimes just say to him, like, are you just living in the land of denial? When he's not living in the land of denial, he just literally is geared to see it a different way. And maybe that's not bad. It just is.
It can be frustrating.
It's frustrating. It's thank goodness he doesn't see it from my lens. That would be a problem.
No, it's there's a reason you were attracted to each other. Like there's a balance. It creates balance, hopefully. Okay, so but we're agreeing that now. What the reason I said now, here's where I shifted. I said, Leora, this is a little bit of a different course than the usual courses because of the current climate. We're doing this in 6 sessions. It's going to be, each one is going to have some practical takeaways that we can really work through, tools. And it's a 6-part series, and it's more of a farbringen. And a farbringen is really, the word farbringen is no right word in English for it. It's like one of these Yiddish words like mensch, where there's like 10 words to describe it. A farbringen is the gathering of the souls, the gathering of the minds, the gathering of people, and really it's through stories that we're gonna look and learn and discuss and personalize. And so I was saying that this is kind of a journey backwards to understand why Chabadniks, and I can't say obviously every Chabadnik thinks feels that way, but our role model, the Rebbe's model for leadership, and the Rebbe's model that he showed us through action. Okay, it wasn't just based on this is in theory the best way to operate. This was like what the Rebbe's behavior showed us and modeled, and we'll see it throughout a lot of different correspondences and stories and little video clips, and it will give us a lens to see things through, like to walk away with this positivity bias. Because as Sarah so accurately said, our brains are not hardwired that way, and it can feel really frustrating. It can feel really overwhelming, and it can feel really unfair, which, like, why God did you create us with a brain? That seems the negative. So one story I want to share with you, and I did say we're gonna have a bunch of little video clips, is a man wrote to the Rebbe very frustrated that he would, I'll let you play it. I'll play this, and it's a short clip. So that's the nice thing, is we have a bunch of short little clips that I'll be able to share with you. Oh, hold on, sorry. still playing music. Sorry, I have to figure out how to. Okay, sorry about that. All right, so what was that very brief clip, right? So the brief clip is basically sharing that story. Oh, oops, I forgot to start my, okay. Sharing the story of how this man went and, you know, saw something a certain way. Like, how could this guy show up in a synagogue? Can you imagine someone shows up in Yom Kippur with a newspaper? What kind of judgmental mindset? What kind of response? What kind of reaction? Imagine someone sat right near you in shul and pulled out a newspaper, not a synagogue, not a you know, whatever, Shabbat. It would be so like offensive to like, how could you not? You're in a synagogue, right? And how did the Rebbe reframe the mindset of that businessman? Like, how incredible that despite the fact that this guy, prayer means nothing to him. It's irrelevant at this point in his life. He's either not connected to it. It's not his, you know, path to spiritual expression. There's a lot of people that going to a service in a synagogue is not their first step of spiritual growth. Okay. And how incredible is it that he still shows up, that he's still involved? Why is this so fascinating? Is because the brain, as we said, as Sarah mentioned, and you're 100% right, is neurologically, the description is known as a sieve. That negative, it's like a spaghetti strainer, okay? Imagine water's flowing, negative experiences get trapped, and the positives slip through. So I'll give you an example. You had a great day, kids behaved, didn't, you know, whatever, everything went well. You had one frustrating business call, or one, you know, bad report from a teacher, or one, I don't know, you get a ticket on the way home. That negative part of your day will actually stick with you longer. And I want to give you an example, which you may have heard from me. So I was giving a workshop. I have this gratitude workshop that I worked on and did a lot of research on the Moda'ani and the brain and neurology of it and psychology of it and gratitude. If you've been to it, you've heard it. It resurfaces, and I've actually been asked to do quite a few because I think we're living in an age where gratitude really is a secret key to, it's not even such a secret, it's definitely a key to seeing life in a positive way, right? And living life in a healthy way. So I was going to deliver this workshop about gratitude and about the brain and about the neurology and holding on to positive experiences, negative experiences. And I had to go to Houston. It was a day school that invited me. And at the last minute, I was stressed out. I was tired. And I said, yes, you know, I really just don't feel like driving. And my kids, he said, you know what? I'll take you. Forget it. I'll put my work on hold. I'll drive you. So here he is now putting his whole day on hold, driving me 2 hours there, 2 hours back. Not only is he driving me 2 hours there and 2 hours back, we need someone to take me with the kids. We can have a sitter. So the triplets jump in the car and they leave whatever they were supposed to do. They get in the car. I end up getting work done in the car. I end up taking a nap in the car. The kids didn't fight in the car, and it wasn't because they were just glued into some TV screen. They actually didn't fight. They got along, and we get there, and 5 minutes before we get there, I hit literally a patch of traffic. And now I'm going to be running late. And anyone knows me, I tend to run late because I pack a lot into a very little amount of time. It's for better or worse, or the part of my brain that understands time and space and how long things take is a little broken or just doesn't function properly. It's how I operate, for better or worse, okay? I've come to terms with, while working on improving my reality of time, I probably will never change it because it's probably very much a part of the way my brain processes time, okay? And we're getting there, and now I'm late. So I'm used to the stress of being late, and I don't like it, especially when I have very limited window because it's in school and it's a time period, and I can't just like go over. It's not like a program. Okay, we'll go over 10 minutes. No, it's not. Okay. I walk in the door and she says, how are you? And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. There was traffic. Da, 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 da. Like, as the words are tumbling out of my mouth, I'm like, whoa, I'm literally living example of what I was just about to go teach about. The last 2.5 hours from the time my husband said, sure, no problem, I'll take you, to the time that my kids dropped everything they were doing and he dropped everything they were doing, and to the fact that I took a nap and got work done and had a smooth drive and no one fought, like, there was so much good, and my brain held on to that 5 minutes out of 2 hours. And that's what came out first. And we could be frustrated with it, but it's actually, in psychologists, there's another term called, you know, Teflon versus Velcro, that the positive experiences are like Teflon, Teflon frying pan, it slides right off, and the negative experience is Teflon, they stick on, or otherwise known as the missing tile syndrome. Like if you're in a room and you notice something's missing, if I point out that there's a crack over there, when you walk in the room, you're going to notice that crack. Like our brains are kind of attracted to what's missing, the missing tile, or the, 90% of our ceiling could be perfect in that one spot that's not. And we do it to ourselves, we do it to our children, we do it to our husbands. It's human nature, we're hardwired that way. So anyone could think of, as frustrating as it could be, why? Why would God hardwire us in that way? Any thoughts?
Well, I mean, the psychologist's explanation is just simply survival.
Explain. Yeah, I mean, you're 100% right. So give us.
Yeah, I mean, if you, in order to protect yourself, especially in days before we had all this technology and before we had our artificial intelligence and surveillance and things to protect us, we had to keep an eye out.
Yeah.
For ourselves, for our children, for anyone we cared about. We had to be constantly noticing, because we didn't have, it's like we got home from Galveston today. No sooner are we in here when I hear a beeping, and I'm wondering, what's beeping? And all of a sudden I remember it's our alarm system. I hadn't used it in 9 months because we hadn't left the house. We came back and I forgot to turn it off before we opened the door.
Right.
So, we don't have to be as aware anymore, because we can rely on technology. But before that, we had to watch out.
Yeah. I think you're 100% right. And I know that it discusses how our brains kind of develop special circuits that register negative experiences immediately. Okay. And they go into our emotional memory. And survival, keep us safe and alive, so that, negative stimuli, if we don't react to negative stimuli, what would have happened to us, right? We wouldn't be here. So now we got to override it, and we got to look at how to do that. And we understand how, a child who doesn't know, after touching something hot and burning their hands, if they do it again and again, and they're not registering, their brain is not registering fire, danger, heat, danger, truck, going fast, danger, we're in trouble. So we can understand that it's essential, and we can understand that this, in a way, it's frustrating, but creates a certain hypervigilance, in essence, that allows us, or actually it allows us not to have this hypervigilance, because we just already kind of know what can you imagine if we didn't know what was negative or dangerous ever? That would be A, fatal, but B, everything would alarm us. So think of the opposite. If we didn't have that, then it could lead to more anxiety, because we would not have any radar or any, the word's not coming, but we would have no concept of what's dangerous or not. So we'd worry about everything. So in a way, those negative experiences stick in our minds and our memory, create a bigger sear, or like the spaghetti strainer, they stay, they don't fall through. But we're hardwired that way for reasons. The question is, what do we do about it? And we have to work for positivity, which kind of go against the grain, maybe against the way we were raised, maybe against our nurture of our hardwiring, genetically, maybe against, the grain, essentially. So so that the negative.
Manya, sorry.
Go for it.
It could be also frustration, that sometimes the things doesn't happen as we plan it, and we don't know how to handle that frustration, and we just think about the things wrong that went wrong, instead of the whole thing. I mean, the whole trip, as you said, for example, the whole trip, you just focus on the thing that wasn't like you wanted. And so we don't know how to handle that kind of frustration.
Okay. That's a really good point. And I think I could say as a mom and a woman, that has been a life work, learning to let go of what you expect or think something should look like. And feel free to nod or wave your hand if you agree with that we have certain expectations of how this is going to go down and the lack of control over the situation. And I think if anyone understands, I see some smiles, so some of you relate. Leo and Karen, feel free to like jump in on this one. I think that, you know, our whole life work of like, when we get married, we have children, and it's not only, even if you don't get married yet, you're in relationships, you're at work, we have a lot of our frustration comes from, I thought it's going to look a certain way or be a certain way, and it's not. And I think the world globally is going through that right now. Like, right, we all knew what our summer would look like, and then it's not. We knew, like, the students are going through this for their semester, like this art of letting go, and oh, how uncomfortable is it?
And that too seems to be hardwired in us. I just spent the weekend with our 2.5-year-old granddaughter.
Right.
And was reminded about the terrible twos. And, you know, she's not unique. They are all like this. It is a human thing that there's a period in which you're old enough to get it, but you're not old enough to look into the future and see that there are other alternatives.
Interesting.
And, you know, the brain is just not mature enough, but there's a stage where the brain has an idea of what you want. You know, it's that far in the future, so you can see that far and you know what you want. And if you don't get that, nothing else will do.
Right.
Nothing else.
I feel like there's sort of a parallel with the fact that at least after Gan Eden, the world needs repair. I mean, that why did God leave the world in that state of imperfection that we just constantly have to keep working on making it better? There's some parallel in the fact that we have to keep working and working and working on making ourselves better.
Yeah. Interesting you said that, because there was once a man who wrote to the Rebbe a long letter complaining about all aspects of his life. Life wasn't working, whatever. He was frustrated, okay? And I want to read to you because I think the answer is so powerful about our mindset, because we do have to work constantly. It's not like, oh, I get there and then it's fine, right? It's not like we're ever in the stage of like, okay, I've arrived in this area and it's over. If we're alive, every living thing must grow. There's ups and there's downs. Thank God. I think hopefully we're all at the age and stage where we're mature enough to know that nothing, terrible lasts forever. Nothing good lasts forever. Like life, like that's the nature of this world, right? So this man wrote to the Rebbe and he basically was complaining about all sorts of life circumstances. And I'm going to read the response to you because I think it's super powerful. And in it, the Rebbe writes, in our world, everything is a mixture of good and bad. Human beings must choose what aspect they emphasize, contemplate, and pursue. So it's 3 things, right? First of all, everything has good and bad in it, right? Would you say like money is good or bad? No. Would you say this pandemic is good or bad? It's not all good and it's not all bad. It's not all bad. There's good that came out of the stage we're in. Now, it may be really, 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 really hard on certain days, weeks, months, years to find that. Every stage, toddlerhood, is good or bad. I mean, on one hand, I go to a student on Friday night, she says, I like kids and I want to be a doctor, but I can't be a pediatric doctor. My question, why not? She says, from 2 to 4, they're just sticky. How are they always sticky? I told her, I'm glad she wasn't around when the triplets were too, but is it all good or bad? No, like Sarah said, like it's a natural, healthy developmental stage. And I think as women, as our bodies change and evolve in our roles, we certainly can relate to every single thing is a mixture of good and bad. And the question is, here's the question, what we emphasize, like which one do we focus on? And we know neurologically, psychologically, behaviorally, the thing that we focus on, that's what grows, right? What we contemplate, so what we allow to percolate in our brains, like how much mind space do I give that negative or that positive, and what do I pursue? And I think, like this line alone is just a huge takeaway. What do I contemplate? What do I pursue? And what do I emphasize? Because everything has in it good and bad. And then the Rebbe went on to expound a little bit more to this man. And he said that in essence, there's a commentary on the narrative of Adam and Chava in the Garden of Eden. And some of the sages say that Adam was an ingrate. Okay, he was in utopia. Okay, in literally a paradise, Garden of Eden, and he complained. Didn't like certain circumstances, certain realities. You told me not to eat. I want to eat. You gave me, created me, Adam Chava, androgynous, masculine, feminine being. Why does everyone else have a partner? I need it to be differently. So the Rebbe goes on to say, literally, he lived in a paradise and yet he complained. And then, however, in contrast, there were Jewish men and women who every morning started their day in the concentration camps by thanking their creator and saying Moda'ani, saying blessings in a hellish place like that, right? And so then the Rebbe went on to say, everyone's life is going to have somewhere between those two extremes, right? We're not going to be in a utopia, and please God, none of us will end up in such a dire circumstances, right? Ultimately, everyone's circumstances will be somewhere in between. And the Rebbe went on to say, I'm not telling you this to admonish you, but I'm going to underscore a certain reality. The type of lives we live, whether it's full of satisfaction and meaning or the opposite, depends in a very large measure on our willpower, which will dictate what we focus on, the positive or the negative. And I think within that is, we know this, we've heard this. What do you want to focus on? Whether it's a child that, is acting up and you need to focus on the good in them and they don't know the good that they have yet and you have to help them see it. Whether it's a spouse that you're really frustrated with, but like maybe they're having a rough patch in life. Whether you yourself are like, can't look in the mirror because of the way you're acting, feeling, whatever. We've all gone through that. And really, ultimately, our perspectives and again, what we pursue and what we contemplate and what we feed is what's going to shape it. Now, it seems deceptively simple. That's such a simple thing to say. We all know, way harder to do, right? Way, way, way harder because we have our personality, because of everything else we talked about in the beginning. And so in the next few weeks, we'll highlight key teachings and key tools based on the Rebbe's guidance to different people that will enable us and help dictate and what affects our lives. I want to share with you one more clip, which I think we have a little bit more time for two more clips actually. So I just want to share one more that I think is just so powerful. Sorry. And I think it's here. Okay, sorry. And it's not here. I have to give me 1 second. I apologize. I thought I had it up, but I had the wrong clip. Okay. All right. And I'm going to, so we're going to take a journey into a story of a woman. Her name was Shirley Chisholm, and in 1968, she was elected as the first African-American woman to Congress. Okay. And it's a fascinating story because, trying to find it. I had it last week and I showed it to, here we go. Showed it to the students and it really is fascinating. And I'm going to just pull it up now. Share screen. When it comes to the technology, I wish it was smoother and simpler, but just isn't. It is what it is. Okay. Server network, hold on. Okay. So I'm gonna stop that way. Escape, hold on a second. Okay. No, my mic is not muted. I'm just, okay, sorry about that. So what's so fascinating here, she was really, really broken, and she actually got a phone call from the Rebbe secretary, and the Rebbe's, and she came in, and the Rebbe said, I know you're upset. And she said, I'm so insulted. I'm so hurt. Like, she finally arrived. She even said, a tree doesn't even grow in Brooklyn. Like, why did they put me in the agriculture department? And she knew it was like kind of to put her in her place. Here, you're a woman, you're a Black woman, yeah, take care of the farmers, right? And she was so hurt. And the Rebbe's response, it said, what a blessing God has given you. And she was like, he said, this country has a surplus of food, and there's so many hungry people. Find a creative way to solve the problem, to feed the hungry. And she said the first day in Congress, she met Bob Dole, and the rest is history. And at her retirement, they put a little bit of the quote in, but at her retirement party, she said, I owe it all to a rabbi who was an optimist and taught me what you may think is a challenge is actually a gift from God. And if poor babies have milk and poor children have food, it's because a rabbi in Karanites had vision. And I think it really summarizes something so interesting is we all are going to have challenges, and we're all going to have, and we're living through one. Sometimes I go out and I see everyone in masks, and I like have this moment where I step back and I'm like, what is going on here? Like, I still can't like, are we literally walking around all in like supermarkets and shopping for shoes with masks? It's like such a weird, like, aren't there moments where you look around and you're like, what's going on, right? And we're living through it. It's like something we could never picture, imagine, envision ever, right? And we're all going to have it. And those are both on a global level. As Allison mentioned, we're in a world of repair. We're in a world of tikkun. The world needs our active players. But then there's that our personal lives that feel like we may need, like this is, overwhelming or challenging. And we have to remember that we're active players in this. And that's some of the tools we'll gain throughout this whole, journey, is that. And what's fascinating is, the Rebbe had a heart attack in 1977. And 2 days later, he went to address Chassidim, and he did it from his hospital, not the hospital, from a different room. They basically made a hospital in headquarters. And the doctor said, I'm worried if you like continue on, if you give this talk, like, there's 25% chance you'll have a relapse. And the Rebbe looked at him and said, do you realize you're telling me that no matter what I do, like basically there's 75% chance I'll be good. And of course I'll take care of my health, but there's 75%, like, meaning it's a choice what we focus on. And I want to end with this, and this is why I said it's a little bit more of a upbringing and a little bit more of like understanding the mindset. We can look at this and we can think to ourselves like, wow, but okay, the Rebbe was, a righteous man or a leader, and like he had different perspective. And of course, but interestingly enough, there was a man who the Rebbe would meet with privately, and the Rebbe once said to him, he said, how are you always positive? The Rebbe said, it's something I work on every single day. And you have to understand that this perspective, and the Rebbe did go on to share that with the man, this perspective is not someone who had an easy life. This positivity bias, which we're going to peel away the layers and learn how to adapt some of that into our lives, that takes a lot of work, which the Rebbe was notorious for, okay? And it's something that he tried to also, I would say, inculcate within, for sure, his Chassidim, and for sure anyone he met, to really look at things in a positive way. This was not from someone who had an easy life of, nobility or smoothness. Lived through pogroms, World War I, World War II, refugee crisis, typhus epidemic, where his mother was in charge of taking care of all the typhus patients, and where his mother, they had massive refugee crisis, Bolshevik Revolution, rise of, communism. His brother was murdered, his grandmother was murdered, all by, by the Nazis. He himself lived a life of childlessness, did not have any children. And even one more layer, fascinating, is you can look in the records of the USPS, the address in the United States that got the most letters after the White House was 770. Because thousands of people from around the world, Jewish and not Jewish, reached out to the Rebbe, and not just to turn to the Rebbe, laying out their life crisis, their burdens, their problems. So even if the Rebbe, let's say, had an easy life, and, I was just speaking to someone who was in the field of psychology and said, part of the struggle during this pandemic, every psychologist needs to make sure they have their psychologist, because we're shouldering the burden of so much intensity and so much struggle that people are going through. And so there was thousands, hundreds of thousands of people who turned to the Rebbe and kind of put their burdens on the Rebbe's shoulders. So the Rebbe was shouldering the pain of a generation post-Holocaust, and I'll share more of those, different ideas throughout it. And yet the Rebbe's perspective was inherently positive, but it was work. And so together through the next five weeks, we'll share different stories, different ideas, different thoughts. And today, hopefully what we've kind of thought of, and I'll leave you with this question to challenge yourself at least once this week. Check in with yourself and where's my bias, in different positivity or negativity, because the negative bias is there. We all know it, okay? And once this week, think of a situation where you see it a certain way and say, can I, those three things, can I focus on the positive? Can I emphasize it, right? The three words I think I said was emphasize. What were the three words I said?
Contemplate and pursue.
Say that again.
Contemplate and pursue.
Yeah. If once this week I could emphasize, contemplate, and pursue positivity in one of the circumstances I'm in, we'll be like ahead of the curve next week. In one. And it only takes, and it's a habit. It's like everything else. We got to just train that muscle. So we'll continue. Hopefully, the little video clips, if you like them, great. If not, I could share the stories, but I think it kind of breaks up the, I don't know.
What is fascinating to me, and one thing that I never knew, was what you said about the Rebbe saying that he works on this daily.
Yeah.
And it would be helpful, useful, interesting to know more about that.
And that's what we're going to do. We're going to hear different stories and different perspectives, and to think of it, to think of, that line that stuck with me when I read it. I was like, whoa, I actually, underlined it, because I was like, to think of Adam as an ingrate, but people who were in concentration camps thanking God. Wake up and say Modani. Whoa, so thank God, we're all doing well. This is not an easy phase for any of us, but we all can learn, gain, grow. And it's something that I think it's really a daily, we say avodah, it's daily work. But I think Allison touched upon something that it's work that we all know it's worth it, right? Okay, because we all know if we could live a little more positivity, our lives would be better. Lives of those around us will be better. The lives of those we interact with will be better, right? But even an added layer is that obviously it will improve things, but it also is something that we often look at Tikkun Olam, repairing the world, as this big macrocosmic, global shift, but it starts in my own world, my own micro world, and then the ripple effect of those I interact with. So more positivity. Ladies, I said we would end with wine, but I didn't get up to get wine. So l'chaim, water is also hydrating and nourishing. And maybe for next week, I'll have a glass of wine, and feel free to bring a glass of rosé or whatever it is. We're all, and I hope to hear more from you and your thoughts, ideas. Feel free to invite other women to join. We're not snobs. This is a nice group of people. And we should all be able to add a little more positivity to our lives. One little step. L'chaim.
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 Looking forward to continuing to learn. Good night.
Thanks, Manya.
Thanks,
you.
Manya.
Thank you.
Good night. Thank you, Manya.
Good night.